So welcome to this rather special meeting of the London Transport Museum Friends. I'm Barry Lejeune, the Chief Executive of the Friends organisation. Everybody you'll see in this presentation is speaking from home. I'm not at Covent Garden, contrary to what you see in the background there. We're all at home, largely isolating, but many of us still working. What we're planning to do with this session is I will very shortly introduce both Sam Mullins and Chris Nix, Director and Assistant Director, respectively, of the London Transport Museum. And Sam and Chris will explain how what we've all been going through over the last month or so, couple of months or so, has impacted on the museum, how they've coped with that in the short term, and I hope we'll also say a little bit about the thinking which is beginning now to develop as to how we move on into a slightly more relaxed but still very controlled environment in the months ahead. I should probably make the point that we're doing this session live as far as we are concerned, the participants you'll see on Wednesday the 27th of May. Our intention is that we are recording this. We're doing it by Zoom now, but we're recording it, and the recording will be put, we hope, on YouTube for a much wider audience of friends and others to see in the days ahead. And indeed, as you're listening to this, that may well be exactly what you're doing. So that's the background, but I say, remember, in all our discussions, we're talking on the 27th of May. And so now I'll hand over to Sam Mullins.
Thank you, Barry. Could you all just mute your microphone so we don't get extraneous background noise? Thank you. Great. Well, it's good. It's good to see you all. It's overdue to kind of bring you up to date, really, on what's happened at the museum in the last couple of months. So Chris and I are here to show you a short presentation, which, as Barry says, is very specific to today. And I guess, like lots of our planning, will be entirely different by the end of next week, certainly by the end of next month. But it is what it is, and we thought it was important to test it out on you, and to get some discussion and some questions and answers going for the second half of this session on the museum's immediate and kind of medium-term future. So without further ado, I'm going to share the presentation with you. You should be all able to see that now, I think. Great. This is a variation on a kind of presentation we've done a bit in the last 2 or 3 weeks for Transport Museum's board and its finance committee and others, which just brings everybody up to date. Of course, the obvious news that it's terribly quiet at Covent Garden, because actually nothing is going on in Covent Garden at the moment. This was a picture taken about a week ago when I cycled in to make sure the museum was still there. And indeed it was, but it was eerily quiet. And there's a more kind of extended version of this out on a blog that we put out last week. And it's kind of curious, isn't it, we've been reflecting a lot this year. This is the 40th anniversary of the museum's opening in Covent Garden by Princess Anne. And we ended up, in effect, celebrating the 40th anniversary of the museum by closing it at the end of play on the 17th of March, which was a kind of terribly difficult decision to make at the time. It now just seems like normal life, really. So since we closed, it almost feels like history now. But from the middle of sort of early March, it began to be clear that the virus was going to have an enormous effect on us. We started kind of daily meetings to work out what was going on. We thought we would stay open for as long as possible. And then over the kind of weekend of the 14th and 15th of March, there was a kind of huge kind of change of public sentiment, really. The government advised pubs and gyms to close, and suddenly our visitors fell off a cliff, and we decided to close the museum until further notice. at the end of the 17th of March. And during that week, we all moved to remote working. And of course, the lockdown formally started a week later. Not being open, not being able to trade, removes almost kind of 90% of the museum's income. So we put together a request to TfL for financial support and had a letter of comfort back in remarkably similar format to the letter which TfL had in fact received from the DFT over the weekend, a letter with, in principle, support, but lots of conditions attached. We've furloughed all, but I think it's actually 28 this week, of the 212 staff and contractors and guides and so forth that we have on the books. And that's part of 7,000 staff across TfL who've been furloughed since 27th of April. Some of ours we obviously backdated to when the museum closed. That helps us cover some of the funding gap, as you can see, something like £300,000, but by no means all. And of course, the full impact of the closure will really occur in 2021 rather than in 1920. What we've done is there's a fortnightly finance working party with TfL, which is looking at the rationale for funding from TfL to help us with that lost income. And a couple of days later, each fortnight, there's a special meeting of the finance committee at the museum, which it's got delegated power from our main board to look at the ongoing sustainability of the museum. And we've now made a formal request for funding to TfL and to Arts Council England under their emergency funding procedures. So those are all in play at the moment. The museum is strangely quiet. It's a bit Sleeping Beauty like, although you can see a cleaner moving in the background. When I went in, they'd done an extraordinary job cleaning the floors. We now got the cleanest and most empty museum in the UK, I think. So it's locked down. We have security staff in 24 hours, as we do at Acton. We've got one member of staff going in and having a look at the kind of integrity of the building and making sure that systems are all running okay. Otherwise, we're pretty much locked down. I guess what I wanted to do as well is just kind of, in a way, the last year was terribly successful. We had really good visitor numbers at Covent Garden. We would have probably exceeded last year if we hadn't lost the last 17 or 18 days of the year. And we ended 8% above our income target for last year. And in many ways, up to mid-March, 1920 was a pretty good year for us. So it was the year of Hidden London. Chris's exhibition, the book, the tours program has been a huge feature of our public program this year, along with the Thames Link exhibition. And it enabled us to deliver a surplus in our operating account after 2 years of really heavy investment in income generation. And we delivered a 800,000 surplus last year. Some erratics in that, but it's a really great performance. And our reach statistics grew by about 10% to 1.5 million. We saw 120,000 children off site. 65,000 participated in our STEM careers program, Enjoyment to Employment. And we've got something like 1 million online users of our website and resources, and 120,000 social media followers in one strand or another. So, and I guess because the highlight, just a fortnight before we close, was the royal visit to Covent Garden. A kind of strangely wet day there. Garden could do with that at the moment. To celebrate TfL's 20th anniversary, the longest lasting version of Transport Authority in London since 1933. It's hard to kind of remember that. I keep looking at these pictures and thinking, look at all these people, they're far too close together, and none of them are wearing masks. But of course, this is part of the old world rather than the new. So since then, what we call the bare bones staff has been doing a number of things. A big shift towards online activity, using existing resources as far as possible, doing a virtual poster weekend, which was going to be the Depot Open Weekend theme in April. Chris and the Hidden London team have put together a brilliant Hidden London Hangouts, which I haven't done the calculation for about a week, but when I last looked, it had 15,000 views across 7 programs, I think, put together very quickly on the fly, and with the help of a volunteer BBC producer, Alex Grunden, is great, has a kind of personality, strong personality of its own, and has shown us actually what could be done with some existing platforms online. We've done quite a lot of work on bundling together all the materials for people who are teaching their children at home with kind of resources, and our online shop, of course, has continued and done pretty well, actually. We're certainly doing better than this time last year. At one stage, we were 75% ahead in the first 6 weeks of lockdown. So as you're doing, a lot of people tending to shop online, shopping for games, shopping for presents for each other, just to kind of spoil each other a bit in the grimness of being under house arrest. So that just summarizes the Hidden London Hangout. It's kind of light-hearted. It's charmingly nerdy. It's a very informal discussion. It's not wildly polished, which is kind of part of its charm. And if you haven't seen those, I do urge you to have a look at that. And Chris is just currently thinking about he's just recorded, I think this morning, the 10th episode in the series, and he's just thinking about where a second series might go. And our current thinking is it might well have a Depot focus in the future. As I said, online shop doing pretty well. I was on a wonderful museum conference call where the head of marketing activity at John Lewis bewailed the fact they couldn't sell sofas. We could say, well, actually, we've sold 3 in the last 3 weeks online, including the rather marvelous leopard skin hove design, which you see on the slide. One of the areas we've also kept going is corporate sponsorship, the whole development function. I think you know us well enough now to know that corporate relationships are long-term relationships. They're not just tapping up someone who seems to have a lot of cash or a big contract. So we're quite keen to retain our capacity to maintain those long-term relationships. And I've been ringing around people on that and other lists just to say hello and to stay in touch. We did secure the global deal in the first week of lockdown. We've been talking to Global for some time about renewing their sponsorship of the gallery and the future National Poster Gallery proposal that we were talking about. So we're still putting a lot of energy into those relationships, and we've retained about half of the development team to enable that to happen. The Interchange Programme, Thought Leadership, has gone online. The first webinar was on the 13th of May on rethinking sustainable cities with coronavirus and distancing and so forth in mind, and we're looking to do more of that. And I think we're 99% sure we're going to be postponing the gala dinner on the 7th of October, because we just feel that even though table sales have gone terribly well, October already seems too soon for people to feel entirely confident, about joining big gatherings. Who's left at work? we were really keen to maximise the return from the job retention scheme. It's our only significant source of income, really, at the moment, and gives us a little bit of capacity to still work on the web shop and to work on corporate fundraising and so forth. To complete some key projects, we had a new web shop, new platform, and a new online site quite close to being complete. The online web shop, I think, is next month, and the website is September. So we just wanted to finish those off. We were contractually obliged to finish those off as well. I've talked a bit about keeping the museum alive online, keeping in touch with the buildings, and the leadership team are doing the kind of governance and leadership required to keep the organisation on track and to keep it alive. So the big discussion at the moment is about future financial viability. As you can see, the tills are empty at the moment, and we are burning through our reserves at a fair rate. But we're optimistic that that our relationship with TfL will deliver funding at some point in the future, and we will develop a new sustainable kind of funding model for the medium to longer term future. And then we're just starting to think about what reopening might look like. I think probably we're all aware that over the last 8 weeks, it seemed like it was quite close at some times, but the longer those 8 weeks have gone on, the kind of further away it does seem to get, not least because of problems of getting people into central London with a very restricted tube capacity, and people being wary of using public transport, I think, at the moment. So we're doing a lot of horizon scanning with other attractions, talking to colleagues across Europe, finding out many transport museums in Europe opened a week or two ago or are about to open. So it's very interesting to tap into their experience. Jeff and his colleagues are doing some work on the capacity of the museum, what kind of numbers we could get, what kind of cleaning regime, what will people expect in terms of distancing and so forth before we get towards opening. There's a lot of work being done across the whole sector on a kind of industry standard for a socially distanced visitor attraction, which we're tapping into. We think that our modelling at the moment is that we think we're going to be unlikely to be back in action in any form before the 1st of August. Last two slides. Next steps really are we continue the kind of move online. I guess we're also thinking that not only is this sort of a bridge to a kind of recovered future, but it's also, in the case of things like Hidden London, perhaps a new line of activity. Can we turn this into an income stream, in its own right, rather than it just being a kind of replacement formula? Our financial modelling has done 3 opening dates: August, November, and April next year. April next year really is a disaster, but a number of museums, particularly those which don't do much winter trade, are seriously wondering if, having got to August and they're not earning revenue, whether they don't stay mothballed until Easter next year. And you'll be aware of the conversations around problems that theatres are having, which are probably even more profound than ours, about how you can have a theatre which has only got 20 or 30% capacity, and how you make the sums add up in those circumstances. So we're doing some modelling about could the shop open first? Covent Garden, I think Apple Store and some of the big stores with deep pockets are opening with government relaxation on the 15th of this month. We don't think there's going to be many customers to serve out there, so we're a little bit wary of opening too early. Our thoughts in the last few weeks have turned quite actively to Acton. TfL are very keen to encourage people to kind of move around locally rather than use public transport network into town. I think many people will be kind of happier with just staying local. So could we do something at Acton that feels like a holiday activities for families for maybe some part of August? And do we do a sort of separate family and adult offering? And we've just put out feelers to the to Miniature Railway and thinking about bringing that back into that scenario. And I exchanged emails with the Q-Stop project yesterday, but at the moment the place is locked down. But we are looking at the feasibility of opening that back up at some point in the summer for sort of limited volunteering. And Chris could probably talk about that better than I. We keep the kind of furloughing issue on in our sites. It's possible after 3 weeks to bring people back in. So Chris has brought back a couple of colleagues who've been working on 3 or 4 programs for the Hidden London Hangouts to do them in a week and put them back out onto furlough again. And some areas you may well rotate staff, so have someone in and a colleague in for 3 weeks at a time and rotate. We'll look at that as the as time goes by. And then we're doing a lot of work on the business of physical distancing and the kind of the operational model for Covent Garden shop, museum, cafe, and Acton as well. And we've got it in our minds that when we do open at Covent Garden, we may well open later in the morning and later into the evening to kind of move ourselves away from the peak, much as the Kaufer poster on the right suggested people do in the 30s. And then the final slide, it is quite clear that undistance gatherings are going to be pretty difficult to make work for some time into next year, or at least until a vaccine is available and widely distributed. So hence our doubts about the fundraising dinner, about school visits, about your lectures and our own. We've kept the open weekend in September in the diary, but we don't think we'll be using it kind of conventionally, or even heritage operations. We need to think quite hard with our volunteer group about sort of the appetite for volunteering. The visitor sentiment research that the industry have done suggests that regular museum visitors and users and volunteers over 55 are the keenest to get back into museums. They're also those that will need most convincing about the measures that are in place to make that safe for them. So there's an active line of work on that, and we'll be bringing Sam Clift back in, I think it's next week, to start doing some work on that. I've talked a bit about activity at August, and generally we're just looking about, will the world have moved on so significantly that quite a lot of our delivery will need to be much more preponderantly in digital than we've done up to now. So that's my presentation, and I'll just unshare that. Barry, back to you for some questions, perhaps, before we pass to Chris.
Yes, I don't want to hog this, and I'm sure a number of the questions that I've got will be in other people's minds. You've touched a little on volunteering, Sam. Perhaps you could say a little bit more about that, as it might interest the YouTube audience that will see this shortly. I mean, I guess there's 2 scenarios. There's a sort of private volunteering where you go to the depot for heritage bus cleaning and Q-stock and heritage train engineering and so on. And then there's the public face of volunteering where you're actually interacting with the customers. Can you just say a little bit more about how you see both of those 2 aspects developing in timescales?
Yes, I'll leave the first one to Chris, because I think he and I were talking about it only the other day. The kind of volunteering to for operational support is a hard ask at the moment, I think. And our belief is that it'll be hard to entice people back into volunteer operationally until we've demonstrated in some way or another that we're kind of up and running and safe. but we're bringing Sam Clift back in precisely to kind of begin to just test the waters for that, and to talk to the volunteer group and to find out kind of how they're feeling. And we're in touch with one or two other volunteer areas. I was talking actually to Tamley at Brooklands the other day. He's also surveying her volunteers at the moment, just to kind of see how they feel and what it would take to entice them back. Because as you know, Barry, operationally there are certain things like depot weekends and fairly routine openings at the museum, which are considerably enriched, if not made possible, by having volunteers. Chris, do you want to pick up on the kind of smaller scale project work?
Sure, yeah. I think as well as all of the practical considerations around social distancing and cleanliness and all of the things which need to be in place for anybody to be returning, there's, as well as Sam Clift as the overall volunteer coordinator, the individual managers who would normally look after volunteers and provide a management line and supervision are also furloughed, and that will be a complicated path back from here as to who returns and when. So I think, as Sam's intimated, it won't be suddenly everybody back scenario. It'll be a slow case by case process, but there are some elements of project work perhaps that lend themselves to more immediate reintroduction. So but they won't probably look like we're used to looking them before the situation. So it may well be, if there was a group of people working on something, it will now only be one or two at a time, and more infrequently. The ones which probably lend themselves to the return the soonest would be with the miniature railway, combined with any form of opening of the depot, again, not as a open weekend that we're used to in the past, but in a new form of opening the depot. The LTMR is a key draw for that, and would lend itself to careful consideration for return. And the other one that comes to mind is the Q-Stock project, because it's a discrete, self-contained project whose manager is funded by the Friends, and therefore there is both the means and the opportunity to do it. These are all governed by the fact that at the moment the depot is closed and we do not have site management and supervision. It is a secure building and that is it, but there isn't anybody there to support and provide the usual backup that there would be. I was there yesterday just to do a look around and a check on the collection myself, and find something I wouldn't touch. It seemed okay when I was going around. Very odd to see it that quiet, and the weeds slowly turning into a meadow at the front. But otherwise, all seemed in good order. But it until we've got a complement of staff back there, that site won't be accessible either. So I think that's probably it. I think discrete projects and stage once we've first got the depot open, and then the individual managers are returning to their roles. That's about it. Anything you want to add, Sam?
No, that's fine. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, back to you, Barry.
Has anybody else got questions? I say I really don't want to hog all the questions. John Cakeley has his hand up, sir.
On the issue of the cubic theatre, Sam, or Chris, now I presume you will have to stay guided by what they say about theatres and mass gatherings and things like that as the year goes on. Now, I've taken the decision that there'll be nothing for the rest of the year, and there'll be virtual meetings. I would suggest that there won't be anything for considerable time after January. What is your views?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think you're right to just think about delivering what you do to members online, which we've done as an adjunct up to now, because the theatre's usually fit to burst for lecture meetings. So I think you've got to you've got no alternative but to do that, and it will go on into 2021, I think. But you're right. Just track what theatres are doing. But at the moment, the cubic capacity would be about 25, which would be no good to you at all.
No. Okay, thank you.
Paul, London, did you want to follow up on anything on the Heritage Bus Fleet, perhaps?
Yes, we've had this approach from London Bus Museum, who are thinking about running a reopening special weekend. They haven't described what it might be, but they have asked whether we'd be willing to turn up. I'm pretty sure it doesn't involve actually running anything carrying passengers. But I'm wondering how the museum might feel about supporting that if we're able to.
When are they thinking of doing it?
Sorry?
When are they thinking of doing it?
18th of October.
Yeah.
I think the tricky thing now is if they're looking for a commitment now, the best we could do is say we will look at it. It will depend very much as to at what point our vehicle curator, senior vehicle curator, and Alex are back at work, and also whether when the depot is back and suitable as a place where we can do fitness to run and do all of the things that would be a basic requirement to take the vehicles out. October sounds like a long way away, but there are just too many unknowns, I think. So if they're looking for a hard commitment now, the answer would be no. If they're looking for a would you consider it if, when and maybe, then yep, absolutely.
They are only looking tentatively.
Yeah.
They're not looking for a firm commitment. I've already said they wouldn't get one.
Yeah, I wouldn't rule it out is the short answer, and I think we have a tentative yes if the right conditions can be met. But obviously the safety and care of the vehicle and the people around it are first and foremost in our thinking.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay.
Anybody else got?
Barry? Yep. This is really linked to, amongst other things, the release of that very good presentation to a wider audience. Is one of the things that we ought to consider collectively for want of a better description, a catch-all email address that could go on the back of the presentation and be distributed elsewhere, where with some of the very meaty topics that have been raised this afternoon, people could at least contribute ideas to a focal point within the museum structure, for better or for worse. So in other words, if people think, I wonder if this might be appropriate, and I'm thinking particularly of innovation, social media, and some of the things in terms of what we need to do in the short, medium, and hopefully not long term, that at least it could come to you, Sam, or your team, so that you've got it for consideration. Because there are various things that have just run through my mind listening to the presentation, where if there was somewhere to send a very sort of bullet point series of suggestions, at least they're not lost, whether or not they're worth taking forward.
No, sure. I think you could send them to me, you could send to Emma, send them to the director's office. I guess our caveat at the moment is that we have extraordinarily little capacity to do anything.
Indeed, yeah.
My team have been as busy as ever, if not more so, in the last 8 weeks. So they're not necessarily going to get answered within the half an hour, Nick. That's all.
Oh no, I wasn't even thinking perhaps of an immediate answer or an answer at all. It's just almost a depository where you could send things that may be useful, but without any expectation necessarily, given all the priorities and particularly the resource issue, that not expecting necessarily a response.
Well, if we send them to Emma Lucci, and she can act as a bit of a filter for that.
And if I may, just one other point. Probably the exhibition that none of us would want to see or would have wanted to have seen in the future will be the story of the COVID era and its impact on transport in London as one example. Is there an opportunity to refresh the relationship with the existing businesses who are obviously going to be extremely stretched at the moment, so that some of the story doesn't inadvertently get lost? Because having worked on major disruption, shall we say, over the years, I know how easy it is to find that you turn round after it's subsided and some of the material has just been lost. And in the computer age, that's even easier to find things that were in being and part of the story just don't survive.
No, it's a really good point, Nick. As it happens, I started keeping a kind of work diary at the start of the year. And as you know, I've been doing some work on TFL's 20th anniversary and doing a series of interviews with all sorts of different people, and with a view to writing the kind of first history of TFL. And I'd rather thought that in that book there would be 2 interesting chapters where we kind of cut across the kind of the narrative of the 20 years and just see how TFL shaped up under pressure. And one was 7/7 and the other was the Olympics was 2012. I think we've now got a third, arguably, existential crisis for TFL. So I've got my eye on that, certainly. We've also got the documentary Curators strand of activity, which has carried on, which is looking at gathering diary and blog type material from and the public domain across TFL, and that's still doing some work, although it's only got limited capacity at the moment. But you're right; it is a pretty momentous moment. And
Can I just add, sorry,
come on, Chris. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I thought you'd done. Yeah, I think having Rosamund as documentary curator, we purposefully kept her on during this period because she's Arts Council funded, because we knew it would be a rich, as you say then, Nick, not a desirable thing to collect, but it's nonetheless an important one to collect. In the last few days before lockdown, I know a number of us who were still heading into office were, photographically documenting things. I think it's worth remembering that TFL Corporate Archives will also be collecting during this period, and so we will be complementing that. And also visual images services have carried on as well. So I think we were very alive to that. Actually, the last few days before lockdown occurred, our focus was on this is serious enough that we need to preserve for posterity. So
One question I was going to raise, Sam or Chris, was we haven't mentioned the library other than in passing, or indeed the premises which it occupies, which is Albany House. And I wonder whether there's thought given to whether that might be able to open in any controlled way anytime soon.
No plan at the moment. I guess if I was put cards on the table, the furloughing scheme is actually saving the museum's bacon at the moment. We would have otherwise run out of cash around about the end of September. So there's a real incentive for us to continue to access that furlough cash as long as possible. And of course, the world we're operating in is very much about, as we've been talking today, about various elements of activity being kind of staggered back in. And inevitably, as soon as you take someone off furlough, you have to pay their wages. And you'd rather hope that they were paying their way either by earning income through admissions or by trading activities or whatever. So those things will have a kind of inherent bias in them on the way back. So, and the only other comment I'd make, I guess, is it's audience based, and I don't think anyone's going to be hurtling into Albany House in the near future wanting to talk to Caroline and access the materials there. So there's a lot online. We're still dealing with inquiries through Matt and who's the only curator currently employed and not furloughed. Chris, there's nothing. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's right. I think the other restraining factor is, of course, Albany House shares shares its space not only with the museum but with other organisations. So yesterday was my first trip briefly back to the office and to the depot since lockdown began, and I think I'm only one of 3 people who've been back to the offices. It is not geared up to be expecting anybody but the odd person per week back there at the moment. So I think it will emerge in I think fairly near time how that will stage a return and what it'll look like. But at the moment, having gone into that building yesterday, there's no way it should be receiving visitors. It's just not ready for it. So there's quite a few things to fulfill before we can consider the library.
And I guess the message we've been putting out, Barry, to our colleagues is that it's quite possible that we won't be in the office this side of Christmas, and that the messaging from TfL will continue to be for a long time. If you can work at home, please do that. There may come a moment when we can, I think when we start to have something open, whether it's at Covent Garden or Acton, then the management needs to show their face and do some, sensible leadership. But I think the kind of conventional office life will not be seen this side of 2021.
Right, gentlemen, are there any last questions?
No, I think that's fine, Barry.
Just like being at Covent Garden, you wait for a few minutes and then you say, no, that's it then, so we'll finish. I think we're done, Sam. Can I say a sincere thank you to you and to Chris for sharing initially with us the Friends management team, but as I said in my earlier introduction, hopefully a much wider audience in due time when we put this, as we hope to, on YouTube. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all the information you've shared. It's very obvious that a lot of work is being done. And it's equally obvious that there's a lot of uncertainty. So where we're going to be in 1 month's time, let alone 3 months' time or 6 months' time, who knows? But we've, I think, started a useful form of communication. We might perhaps try again in the space of a few months, another session like this, which again we can share with the wider membership of the Friends, and just a message to those friends who may be watching at a later date. We do hope to start our ongoing program of presentations, specially recorded, virtually to share on YouTube very shortly. Thank you all very much indeed.